for the first half a year, I hated it.
Really? Literally, my question after this was going to be, oh my God, was it love at first sight? It wasn't.
No, it absolutely wasn't. It was 6 months of pure hatred. And crying almost every week in the bathroom, thinking I just want to go home.
Oh my God.
And then it just shifted 180.
She turned some of her hardest moments as an immigrant into something powerful. Jane Fisher, founder of Imii, is using AI to help others feel at home. Hear how it all came together in her own words.
I don't know if you've ever heard the term third culture kid. It's a term that refers to children who spend a significant amount of their developmental years in a country that's different from their parents' origin. So they are raised in the crossroads of cultures. They quite often find themselves not belonging to any of the countries that they've been raised in or been exposed to or originally come from. There's actually a book and a study. And now that I'm reading this book, it makes so much sense to me, like why I am the way I am.
The name is pretty interesting, Imii. What's the meaning behind the name?
So I wanted it to have a clear connection to immigration. Imii sounds like a human name, like it could be short for Imogen or something like that. And I wanted it to provide that same experience of having a human coordinator.
I resonate a lot because that's something that I'm very passionate about. So walk me through that. Walk me through the entire journey.
Well, so we...
Jane, welcome to the pod.
Pleasure to be here.
Before we get started into Imii, and I think it's a very interesting business because very close to my heart. Obviously, the theme of the podcast and everything that I'm trying to build off the back of that. Tell me about your immigrant journey. When did you move to the UK? Where did you come from? And why are you here?
Well, I always say Imii is an extension of me because I am an immigrant born and bred. I was never a non-immigrant from the day I was born. I don't know if you've ever heard the term third culture kid. I've heard this term ages ago, but I've only discovered that there's actually a book and a study of third culture kids. It's actually a scientific phenomenon. And now that I'm reading this book, it makes so much sense to me, like why I am the way I am. And third culture kid is a term that refers to children who spend a significant amount of their developmental years in a country that's different from their parents' origin. So they are raised in the crossroads of cultures. They quite often find themselves not belonging to any of the countries that they've been raised in or been exposed to or originally come from, because there's such a mix that they only truly feel the belonging when they're in the environment where they are among the same people, or at least where the society is multicultural, like here in London. And they don't really fit into monocultural societies where people don't tend to leave their place of origin. So that's me, because I think my mix is quite wild. I was born and raised in Japan, and obviously nothing about my appearance suggests that. I'm definitely not Japanese, and my DNA test confirms it. My parents were originally born in Russia, and their parents come from all over Eastern Europe, which is quite common for the USSR, that they're from the country that no longer exists. And I was raised in Japan until the age of 16. Then I left it, and then I studied here in the UK. Then I left UK for a few years, and then I came back to settle here a bit over 2 years ago, because after all the landscape changes in my life, I realized that London is the only place where I truly feel home, where I truly feel like I belong here. There are many people like me. I don't feel like an alien. Because again, London being a multicultural society, being at the crossroads of cultures and times and everything. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Well, I mean, as they say, every day you learn something new. Thank you for teaching me that today, because technically speaking, now I'm also one of those kids, because I'm ethnically Indian, but raised in Dubai. And yeah, so I mean, for most of my life, I've only known existence as being an immigrant. I mean, now I've applied for my citizenship. I'm still waiting for it in the UK. But then, oh, thank you. So I see how that shifts. So how that shift happens in my head after that happens. But I can already see emotionally how that's making me feel. It's already making me feel a sense of belonging, that, I've arrived. Okay, so this is my country, and this is where I'm going to be living for the rest of my life, potentially. But third culture kills. Let's just talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
So, so what do the studies really say? I mean, how does that impact you as a child growing up? I mean, because I felt like I had identity crisis, for example. Like, I mean, that's just like I'm like, oh, I'm in this Arab world. I'm Arab, but I'm not. When I go to India, I don't feel Indian, although I speak the language. So there's a lot of confusion. At least that was my experience. I don't know what the actual studies are behind that.
Well, there's definitely no one size fits all approach, but the common things that third culture kids share, and again, it helps so much to read about this because you finally feel normal, is that you naturally don't really feel like you truly belong anywhere, that you have to pick the bits and pieces of your identity from different countries and cultures and sources, because that's the way you are a mosaic of those cultures and languages and whatever you've absorbed. Your upbringing is different to kids in your home country,
Mm.
but equally your upbringing is usually different from the kids in the country where you were raised. Because definitely you're not Arab, are you? Your biography would be different from kids who were born and raised in Dubai in the local families. And then when you relocate somewhere else, again, uh, other than in a few places in the world which are hyper multicultural, like London or say New York, again, it would be in a process of adapting, but never truly growing into the society, never truly becoming one of them. You would just fit into it rather than be a real part of it, right? So at least that's how I guess you felt. That's how I felt. Like I was never Japanese. I didn't study in a Japanese school, and even if I did, Japan is a very monocultural society. They're not. I wouldn't say they're completely non-immigrant friendly, but they don't integrate immigrants. They don't absorb them. They are very self-sufficient, and I bet this is going to be remaining the case for years and years. It's still like that, as far as I've heard, even though I left Japan many years ago. So I had no chance to fit into the Japanese society, and my mentality is also very different. I worked in a Japanese company. I wouldn't survive there if that was my only option. Then when I came back to Russia for my bachelor degree, that's probably the longest I've stayed in Russia, 4 years doing that. Again, after Japan, it felt like home
Mm.
because that's where people spoke the same languages as myself. People would read the same books and so on. But also, I did not grow up there. And everything that I was exposed to in terms of the language, the culture, literature, the cutoff of everything I absorbed is the year when my parents left Russia. And that's the 90s and early 2000s. Those are historically very significant years in terms of culture, in terms of political, like Soviet Union was pulling apart and then Putin came to reign and all of that. I experienced none of it. Coming for a summer holiday does not count as being very really exposed and listen to the same music or reading to the same books, at least modern ones. So what I have in terms of my Russian cultural upbringing is the distillate of 19th, 20th century literature and music. So um, a very aristocratic distillate, I'd say, which is nice, but it also makes me a total alien when it comes to trying to integrate in what current Russian society is. And again, I felt at home when I was doing my bachelor degree. But once I came to the UK and after spending a year and a half doing my master's here, I think that made this irreversible change to my brain because I finally broadened my horizons, seeing another environment different from anywhere where I've been before, where you can truly be anyone. You can pursue anything, you can find anything you're looking for, and you don't have to belong to a single culture. You don't have to speak a single language. You don't have to share that background with anyone. And after that, I think my links with one of my home countries, which is Russia, still they weakened, and I never truly felt at home back there. So basically, my return to London was just inevitable in that sense, or at least if I could have ended up somewhere else, maybe some other multicultural city, but London is a specific place where I felt most at home because it's not just about the mix of languages and culture. It's also about London having everything, the history, the music, theater, and architecture, and it's just I don't know. There's everything here, right? So that's how I ended up here, and I think that's why London attracts so many talented expats and immigrants and everyone from around the world, because everybody can find their home here.
Yeah, I agree. I think I resonate with when you spoke about Russia. I mean, whenever I go back, or not go back home, but whenever I visited India, I really felt like an alien. Although that was the one place where everybody looked like me, everybody spoke the same language, but I never felt as distant from the space or the culture or the environment as much as I felt when I was actually in that environment. I somehow, interestingly enough, I kind of felt more Indian when I was not in India, just because that was my reality. I thought I was the most Indian, but as soon as I landed in India, it just felt, oh shit, like there's obviously a huge difference, and I feel the same. I don't think. I mean, obviously, life has changed and so on, but even if it didn't, I would do whatever it took to not be a part of that culture simply because I just could not resonate. It was just, again, I also had this deep innate need of finding that multicultural society somehow where I could also fit in and find home. So, talking about just coming back to Japan, um, so was this the reason you explored out of Japan to continue your studies, or I mean, was it a sense of belonging? Was it the or
No, not really. It's a more mainstream story, I guess. I met a guy that I fell in love with, and he was from Russia, so he went back to Russia to study in university there. And being a pretty idealistic person as I am, I thought, well, might as well go back to Russia, because I know who I want to be with, but I don't know where I want to be. So I made that choice at the time. My parents were trying to convince me to stay in Japan or maybe venture elsewhere. Um, and I think it's a good thing that I didn't take that option, because I was such a greenhouse kid. Because when you're living in that distilled environment, and I was going to an embassy school, and it's like going to a private school where the maximum number of people in the class is like 10 people. So it's very easy to be the best student. It's very easy to be visible. It's not easy to make wide social contacts. If you've got a friend, you probably have one close friend. So it's a very different environment. And it was a shocker moving from that environment into the bigger world. And I guess that's part of the reasons why I consider myself a born introvert, because, well, I never had an environment to explore being something else until I decided to take up a career in journalism, which is a different story. But yeah, so I chose to leave Japan and to go to, well, at least a place where people would speak the same language
Mm.
and where at least knew someone. Um, Never regretted it. I mean, despite the fact that I did not eventually fit into the country and didn't stay there, I think it was a sensible choice for the time.
And then why the shift to London? Were you exploring any other cities at that point in time? Because there are other multicultural societies as well.
My parents talked me into doing a master's. I didn't want to. I was happy, content doing my job. I was a sports journalist. I was working on TV already, along with my studies. So by the time I graduated, I had a job already. But they convinced me that I have to have a full degree, so to speak. I come from an academic family. Both my parents had PhDs. I did not inherit an academic gene or whatever there is that pushes you to spend ages in the study rooms. Definitely not the kind of person. I'm a very people person. So anyway, they took me into doing a master's degree. I said, okay, well, I get to choose where. And I wanted a place where I could get work experience along with my studies. Because, I mean, I've been working since I was 18, along with my full-time bachelor degree. Um, I'm a multitasker by nature, or maybe I'm just too ADHD to do one thing at a time. So I was choosing out of the places where I could do some work experience. So obviously it had to be an English-speaking country, because what good is it if I go to say France to study in English, but then I walk out of the university and I can't do anything. And it had to be affordable for my parents. So US was out of question in that sense. It also had to be close enough, and it had to make sense. Like, why would I go to Australia to study
Yeah.
television journalism? So UK was kind of a choice that I narrowed down for myself, and ended up here. And actually, for the first half a year, I hated it.
Really? Literally, my question after this was going to be, oh my God, was it love at first sight? It wasn't.
No, it absolutely wasn't. It was 6 months of pure hatred. Oh no, and crying almost every week in the bathroom, thinking I just want to go home.
Oh my God.
And then it just shifted 180. Why? I'm still not sure what was the turning point. I think I can articulate why I hated it. Because I had things to lose. Because I wasn't just a student who was going from one university to another. Remember, I had a career. I was working for a few years by then. I was a reporter on the national sports channel. So I would be, on screen. People would recognize me. Well, not too many of them, but still. I had a CV, so I was accepted for my master's degree without any certificates at the time, just because I had a solid CV of a journalist who used to write and who was on TV and so on. And then you come here and you're suddenly no one. And I realized that I can't just walk into an editorial and say, hire me for free, I'm going to work for you as an intern, because that's illegal here. And there is also a huge competition even to do that for, say, BBC or something else. And in journalism, by default, you're not favored over the locals, which is understandable because obviously you're not a native speaker. Had I pursued something maybe in more regional, like political news, then it wouldn't matter that much because there is a BBC Russian division or something else. But I was a sport journalist, so again, that was extra hard for me. And also remember all the sports leagues here, they're different. So that required the knowledge that I previously lacked. And well, that wasn't an issue for me because I walked into sport journalism out of nowhere. I had no prior knowledge of sports. I got to work at the Olympics, and that's where it all started. So no prior interest to sports whatsoever until that day. But in the UK, I had to persuade my potential employers, even for a free internship, that I could handle it. So I just instantly got into depression where I was confined to being just a student, being no one again, having to start from scratch. So being a person with quite a bit of vanity and having worked so hard for what I had, I did experience a shock. And what I describe it as to a lot of my friends who relocate here or people that I happen to meet is you kind of become a phoenix here. Like, first thing that the city does to you, it burns you down. It forces you to lose your old skin. It forces you to burn your old self down so that you can really rediscover yourself and ask yourself, who am I now? What do I actually want? And then if you survive through that stage, if you let it burn you down and and then revive yourself from that, then you can actually grow a new pair of wings and venture somewhere far further.
Oh, I love that. I love that analogy as well. But I mean, when I came here as well, I think, but I had love at first sight, by the way. So as soon as I walked into it, and this was many years ago, before the whole relocation, I came here for the first time, just visiting with one of my friends. And as soon as I walked out, I was like, oh my God, like this is the city I want to one day live in. And then it was, I think, about 9 years or 10 years later, when I was exploring coming out of Dubai, I actually went to New York. So I was thinking between the US and the UK. And then UK just felt home. And I think it's one of those as well, growing up, the nursery rhymes, the movies, the books, the like everything was just so magical about the UK and London especially. So as soon as I came here, for me it was love at first sight, but it was hell. It was just misery after misery. And it was not because of the city, in my opinion. It was just because I just didn't have money. I didn't know people. Just navigating the whole city, the new laws of the land. Lived in a different country. I had multiple businesses. And I was quite successful, but I lost a lot of money as well. But I knew that how to navigate the system. And here, like, it's just starting everything from scratch. And that was also for me something maybe quite similar, where I really had to start everything from scratch. And every now and again, I had a lot of people, including people who were really close to me, like my friends and family, who loved me the most, who constantly said, okay, just come back. Just come back, because we're all here. You know the space. This is your space. And I don't know, sometimes, it's the people who love you the most. You perhaps, if you want to do something so aggressive, you should maybe not take their advice because they just want to protect you. And I think I was in that space as well. But yeah, I mean, thank God I burned. I did not crash. And fortunately, off the back of it, the rest is history, as they say. So yeah, I can 100% resonate with that. But for you, so you've come here, you're burning, you're hating yourself, you're hating your life, you're hating all the decisions that you've made. What pushed you through though? Because I mean, it's also challenging because you have a family. I don't know how supportive your family was with your decision, but then you had maybe like that cushion or that comfort where you could actually go back to the life that you've created and actually work so hard around it. I mean, for me, in my case, it was also from a place where I was coming into the mental health space. In the Middle East, as you can appreciate, mental health, there's a lot of stigma. In the Middle East, there's more stigma. I wanted to move into this whole startup ecosystem. Here, the startup ecosystem is more mature. So it was also for me, I don't know, like a place of desperation. Uh, what kept you going?
Well, so at the time I still had my master's to finish, right? And it was already paid for. And well, being a responsible and accountable person that I was, I wouldn't leave the master's degree that my parents already paid for. Like I got a small grant in the process, but still. So I guess it helped that my parents were very supportive and they said, look, if you feel so bad there, just, once you finish, come back. No problem at all. So I knew I was free to do whatever I wanted. And so I was just looking forward to coming back to my parents. And then spring came. And spring in London is a very deceptive season, isn't it? It just forces you to fall in love with the city all over again. And it coincided with the fact that I was no longer just a student. Again, being a multitasker, a compulsive multitasker that I am, I loaded myself with a few part-time jobs. Legally, I could only work one part-time job, so just one of them was kind of processed on the regular basis, that the process that you need to do here to hire someone. I got a job with my university, which didn't really pay, but it provided me with free accommodation, so no one had to pay for my accommodation any longer, so that was good. In parallel, I did some freelance for sports-related stuff as well. So again, that kept me busy. That kept me feeling that at least I'm getting valuable experience. I started social dancing here, so that also became a huge part of my life. So overall, my life was getting onto its new rails, and it was spring, and it was just literally 180 twist.
And was so obviously you worked hard. You worked towards that twist. I mean, from getting a part-time job and trying to expand your social circle through social dancing. How easy or difficult is it for someone coming in, hating their life, and then trying to make that shift or that change? Like you feel London has all that if you ask for that.
I think I've observed this shift quite a few times among other people in the community that I'm in, especially from the Russian-speaking community, which still happens to be my closest circle, despite the fact that I don't fit into this community as a whole. I don't really go to Russian social events, but my closest circle is still the Russian-speaking. Um, Maybe because there's still a bit more in our mentality that brings us together. So I've seen so many times, especially in the last few years, since obviously the influx of immigration from Russian-speaking countries has grown for obvious reasons, um, that people come here, people suffer from feeling the loss of their previous lives, and they do end up in pieces and similar to what I felt back then. And I just always keep telling them, give yourself time. You can always go back. But just don't rush into that decision. Give yourself a bit more time. If you feel the same in 6 months, 8 months, then no one's stripping you of the opportunity to go back. I haven't seen too many stories of people going back, but I've seen quite a few stories of this 180 twist at the end of the journey. Sometimes it takes a year, sometimes it takes half a year, sometimes it takes a bit more, but overall, it's not an uncommon story. So I think it is about time. It's about the right processing. I think therapy also should help. I mean, I wish I considered that option at the time, but I didn't. So first time when it happened during my master's degree, I just powered through it. Second time, I was already aware of what was happening when I moved back to London. I also had my transitional period, and I was diagnosed with depression at the time as well. But I was kind of already aware that this is a normal process. This is a process of shedding your old skin, and we'll get better. And I had therapists as well. So I think it's a pretty much a standard thing. London does require a bit of sacrifices from your end, a bit of suffering to actually get to that next level.
Yeah, but that's so true. But London does also give you the opportunity to go to that next level because bam, the world just becomes your oyster. Like it's just amazing how rich, like you were mentioning as well, the culture is and the society is, and the ability to learn from one another. You know, you're sitting in the same room with different cultural backgrounds, different religions, and people speak in different ways, and it's just amazing. This cultural melting pot is just it's such an enriching experience. It's like every single day you have the ability and the opportunity, if you want to learn something new from so many different people across the globe. So, on that note, you were in journalism, then you did your masters, and then did you work in London before you started your business?
I did some part-time stuff and I did some internships. And after my master's, I obviously wanted to stay and I was trying to navigate that process. At the time, there was no graduate visa and you actually had to fight for getting a work visa, which I may or may not have found, but my mom got sick. So I didn't really have a choice. So once I finished my master's, after some time, I had to go back to Russia for the next few years because my mom had a stroke.
Oh,
A
sorry to
really
hear
bad
that.
bad one. So yeah. Um, so where was I? And then, despite the fact that I did a master's in television journalism, yes, after working as a TV journalist, yes, it was not logical, probably not the best spend of my time. But I never went into working as a TV journalist. I went into TV production. Then, after working in the Japanese TV production in Moscow, I realized that my creative skills were dying out. So I started writing for brands as a digital copywriter, then started doing that for a tech company, my first tech employer. Then they offered me to join them on a full-time basis in a managerial position in content marketing. And that's how I started transitioning to tech, which was working well for me until I realized that everything that I was doing was earning me money. I kind of figured out how to make money working in content marketing. But none of that gave me the sense of purpose.
Mm.
So, especially over the pandemic, I did a lot of reflecting on that. And after, as cliche as it sounds, but after about a month of meditation, it kind of hit me that actually what motivated me and what used to drive my decisions is being able to help people with what I do. And that's how I started looking for ways to apply myself and my ambitions in helping people. So I like to help people. I'm not an altruist. So going all the way through, smaller charities up to big NGOs was not an option for me. So I started questioning myself, okay, how do I get straight to the top, like UN agencies or something like that? Tech startups were not in the picture at the time. I had very little knowledge of that sector. And I decided that I want to work for the UN. And then I found a volunteering managerial job in a charity. And I was doing that along with my work in tech company. And that gave me a lot of valuable experience because that was the sense of purpose. There was lack of funds. It was a volunteering position and you don't get marketing budgets in charity. And you have your donors in one side of the world, you have the people you're trying to help on the other side of the world, and you have to sell to these people
Oh my God.
the feeling good about themselves that they've helped these people. So that was a huge challenge, and so I grew a whole department there, so recruiting, training people, and setting up the processes and stuff, which gave me the leverage to seek a better job once I was fed up with the tech company I was working for. And I had two offers, one from Oxfam, which is obviously a huge name in the humanitarian sector, obviously a straight journey into the UN agencies and stuff, which made total sense to take up. But at the same time, I got a job offer from a no-name startup in the field of oncology, which didn't even have a proper website, nothing. But the CPO that was interviewing me, I still say she hypnotized me or something like that. But she told me about their ambitions, and it all sounded way too scary and way too big. And I thought, oh, this sounds scary, but I want to be a part of it. And I was very torn between those two offers because it made no sense to say yes to the startup. It made every sense to say yes to Oxfam. But I followed through with my gut, and I chose a startup. And that's how my journey in tech startups began.
Oh wow. Oh, that's what I mean. A lot of the times, I see the younger generation now moving into the tech startup ecosystem is because a lot of them don't want to go through the whole conventional route and investment banking. No, yeah, been there, done that. Big Four, PwC, KPMG sounded nice back in the days, but now tech startup because eventually maybe I want to start my own thing, so let me get experience. But not when you have experience and you've got pedigree and you have a big name like Oxfam. Yeah, so I think talk me through that lack or that sense of purpose or that urge. So was that urge that drove you through and made you take that risk, or was it because the whole tech startup ecosystem was just too sexy as social media especially uh, shows us?
Well, I say I follow through with my gut, which is true, but I am a very calculated person when it comes to following my gut, which means I do try to truly look into options and apply logic before making big decisions. I'm not saying I'm always making the most logical decisions, but I take calculated risks. So whatever happens, I make sure to evaluate how risky my decision is, and if it's not costing me everything,
Mm.
then I have less second thoughts about making it. So in the case of that dilemma with the two job offers, money-wise, the startup was offering a little bit more, but Oxfam was offering medical insurance, so it was pretty much even. However, I was still volunteering. I was a content team lead in the charity, right? So potentially there could be a conflict of interest between Oxfam and Health and Health, the charity I was volunteering for. And like Oxfam could do without me, but the charity at the time could not. I no longer volunteer with them, but for 3 years I was their content team lead and I felt huge responsibility and I wasn't ready to leave them. And having that conflict of interest wasn't quite something I wanted to deal with. But also, I carefully assessed what I would potentially be able to do. So the position that I was offered at Oxfam was media officer, which means, and it was a Moscow office at the time still. So I looked into what Oxfam was doing in Russia, and I realized that most of the programs that Oxfam typically does, they were no longer functioning in Russia. Like Oxfam usually helps disadvantaged people and underserved, underprivileged communities, right? So they used to have some of those programs in Russia, but I guess largely because of political reasons, they no longer had them. And most of the programs that they did was basically mining resources and money from Russian donors to help people in Syria. Now, in a way that's similar to what I did with Health and Help, right? You've got people in the faraway country,
Right.
and you've got donors not just in Russia. We had an international audience, but because the founders of Health and Help were originally from Russia, the majority of the donors were from the CIS region. But there is a huge difference. One of the small charity, which is grassroots project by two Russian girls from the Ural Mountains who had this crazy idea and raised the funds through fundraising platforms and recruited volunteers and built the clinics in remote villages of Guatemala and Nicaragua. This is a romantic story, right? And it serves the vision of no one deserves to die just because they were born in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And so I could resonate with that vision, but not only that, I mean, I have nothing against, obviously I support all the programs that are carried out in Syria and all the other regions that are war-torn. It's just that the vision of Health and Help, I could work with it. I could sell it as a marketing person.
Got it.
With Oxfam, with all due respect, when we've got a huge humanitarian confederation that is international, selling an idea of supporting poor children in a war-torn region somewhere in Syria to Russian citizens,
Mm.
my potential impact, unfortunately, was not going to work there. I could picture how much hatred I would produce and very little actual help for those children that we're precisely trying to help. Because Oxfam does amazing things. It's just that this was not the region where I could actually make an impact. So I just realized that if my aspiration was to actually do something meaningful, Oxfam would serve my CV, but not my purpose. And with the startup, obviously a startup is always a risky bet. And so the least I could have from this is a learning curve. And I kind of accepted it. But in the chance of success, the contribution to the humanity, to people, would be huge. So I took that calculated risk. And I had very little knowledge of startups. So now I'm smart enough and experienced enough to say startups are an amazing place to grow from 0 to 100 in a very short time, which is what I did. I came on board as a content manager and very quickly grew into head of communications, which essentially was a founder's associate. I became the right hand to the founder on the international branch of the startup. And that's what ultimately led me to secure my global talent visa for the UK and all of that. But at the time, I just mostly it was still a very gut feeling based decision.
Gut feeling, but a lot of calculated risk. I mean, you mapped out the entire calculated risk, which obviously logically now makes sense. There was a lot of logic that you applied to it, and it's nice how there was a combination of sense of purpose. Like you didn't let that go as well. But I mean, also everything happens for a reason. So if it wasn't for that path, perhaps you would still be here, but maybe the journey would be different.
Honestly, I'm not sure I would end up here. I'm still very grateful to myself for following through with my gut. This is not the first time that I took a completely logical decision, which was completely not in line with what I was originally aiming for and working for. And every time it turned out to be for the best. So it's always difficult to distinguish between the gut feeling and your own brain's mind games. So it's always a dangerous trap, but sometimes it's just impossible to ignore it when something seems completely logical, but you just shouldn't do what seems right. You almost feel like you hear the sound of the brakes in your head, like you're not supposed to go there. So that was that exact feeling.
That's amazing. I mean, I know we're talking about a lot of logic, but I truly believe if you do something with the right intent, you do attract the right people in the right circumstances. So I think that intention, and that's why I was pressing on the purpose element. I think that intention is super important. And then somehow, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, the universe just starts working in your favor. And you take that one step and then the second and the third, and then things just happen.
Yeah, and funnily enough, I did end up working for UN agency
Oh, did
just
you?
a bit later. Yeah,
There you go.
2023, having accumulated both experience in the charity and the health tech startup, I secured a part-time consultant position in WHO, World Health Organization.
Oh my God, that's amazing. That's literally a fantastic story. So now let's get into Imii. So, okay. So, I mean, in the beginning of the pod, obviously there's a lot of, I resonate a lot because I'm something that I'm very passionate about. You're actually the first guest on the pod who has this type of business and in this line of business, basically in the sector. So walk me through that. I mean, obviously there's an obvious reason for it because you're an immigrant. And now that I know about you being a forever immigrant, so I'm guessing there's one part of it. But why now? I mean, I think you just started the company just over a year ago, more or less.
Yeah, it's basically second half of 2023, beginning of 2024. Depends on what you classify as the beginning of the company, right?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, exactly. First in your mind, which is like a couple of years even before that. And then you actually start materializing and you incorporate the company and so on. Walk me through the entire journey.
Well, so we stopped at that day when I decided to go into the health tech startup, and that made me fall in love with startups. That made me realize there is a huge potential for actually changing the world there, at least so it seems. Obviously, with time, you realize that statistics are quite merciless in the case of startups. But anyway, at the time, I loved being able to apply everything that I ever learned in my career and being able to influence a lot of things about our strategy and having that mission. So for about a year, I was very much in love with the startup. And then, especially after the unfortunate political events started, obviously that, I wouldn't say it killed off our chances of expanding our international branch. I'd say it was a challenge, but it was not really the reason why it failed. But since the spring of 2022, I started falling out of love with that startup. I think my awareness, my experience, my exposure to the startup community started to accumulate enough for me to see a lot of poor business decisions. And I wouldn't like to blame the founder too much because obviously as a CEO and founder, I'm now making all sorts of mistakes now. So um, it's never easy when you're the one driving that vehicle. But just increasingly, I saw that my work was no longer contributing to much impact. Like whatever I would do, I knew that was not going to lead to the success of the company.
Mm.
So, I could write the most genius pitch or bring in the best investor leads, which is what I did, but that wouldn't close. And that's not because of me, but because of the product strategy, because of the company, because of the business decisions that unfortunately as an employee, not a co-founder, I had no power of. So I started thinking, well, what do I do about that? What's that I want to do next? And I was already waiting for my permanent immigration visa, the global talent visa to the UK. And I was still working in the startup, but I was obviously looking for my next milestone. I was studying the job market in the UK, and the more I studied it, the more depressed I felt because even in late 2022, it was very uninspiring. So either the jobs that I was interested in impact startups, they were very low paid, or it was in industries which I had no interest in, like crypto or I don't know, some banking, whatever. And for me, the purpose was very, very important because otherwise I would have just gone after a work visa, right? The reason why I didn't go after this is because I knew that for me, it makes a huge difference what company I work for. So I was in that and just in the process of trying to figure out what I'm doing next. And then uh, this is a funny story actually. And I love sharing because it's quite bizarre. Um, one of my favorite influencers on Instagram, which used to be a dating influencer, and then she became more of a lifestyle influencer. Every year, she publishes a post on Instagram, which is called Non-Secret Santa, where you can go into the comments, offer a gift from yourself, any gift to strangers, and you can snatch any of the gifts offered in the comments.
Really?
And by gifts, I mean anything. You can offer something material. You can offer postcards from your country. You can offer consultations. Um, you can offer, I don't know, an astrological
That's so
forecast.
cool.
I know. I love this concept. And I offered a few of my LinkedIn consultations because that's what I also do on the side. And I snatched a session in regression therapy. I don't know if you know anything about regression therapy, but it's basically hypnosis that makes you dive into your past. In traditional therapy, it's about diving into your actual past to find the root causes of your current mental struggles. In more spiritual practices, it's about diving into your past lives. So, got that regression therapy, and I still remember the day. It was 7 a.m. because the person was in Bali. At 7 a.m., I'm not the most sociable person, but I woke up, so I went on Skype, and we had that call, and she asked me, what's your query? What's your question for today's session? And I thought, oh snap, I didn't even think of the question. I was just so excited of getting that therapy. I said, okay, well, let's dive into my relationships because I'm pretty clear about my mission and all of that. So let's explore this. But as it usually often, let's say, happens with consultations like that I've had with people, whenever I try to look into my relationships, we end up still shifts into my self-realization, self-fulfillment, all of that. I guess are very closely interlinked for me. And instead of venturing into the past, we started projecting the future. And I saw myself in like 2 or 3 years, 2 years time. Um, and I couldn't unsee that future where I was, and where I wanted to end up. And then we started tracing back what should happen now for me to end up there. And that's where I end up with not the decision, but the realization that it starts in my own thing. probably in impact and probably in impact technology specifically. So that's why when people ask me why I decided to launch a startup, I say I'm not sure it was my decision. Still not sure. I'm still not sure I decided it. It was more like I got smacked on the head with that. It was like the universe was patiently waiting for me to realize that, and then it just smacked me on the head and kicked me into that corridor and closed the door behind me. Because once I got back to my conscious self after that session, I could not unsee it. No, it was still 8 a.m. I went back to sleep, and then once I woke up, I applied for Antler, the accelerated program for aspiring founders. I sailed through the selection process, and that was the beginning. And then in the next few days after I applied, I was thinking, okay, well, I do want to build something. What is it though? I never had any ideas for a startup. And I was still in healthcare and I loved healthcare, but I was very sure there was no founder market fit, at least at the time. Like I've learned enough about the startup scene to understand that that's a big thing. So I started thinking, okay, what else can I do to help people while applying my lived experience and my skills? And then I remembered one of my immigration experiences where I was guided through the process with a coordinator who would tell me where to go, what to do, which documents to bring, connect me with the right people who spoke my language in the service provider organizations like banks and mobile networks and all of that. Walk me through the process of verifying academic qualifications. That was a huge game changer in my integration process. And I thought, well, this system works. This delivers amazing ROI for those who fund it. So why don't I try to digitize it? Because when it's human reliant, obviously it costs fortunes, and very few countries would be able to afford it, let alone private institutions. But what if I digitize it? It was even prior to the AI boom. Like AI boom was just ripening at the time. So I thought, well, why don't I build a platform that replicates that exact experience? And drew some basic mock-ups in pencil in my sketchbook. And that's when the story of Imii pretty much began. That's when I picked out the name. Had to experiment with a few variations to make sure that we come up on Google. And on mix with other apps on App Store. And then in the next half a year, I didn't do anything about it until I actually got into Antler and started working on that idea.
Before I get into the business, the name is pretty interesting. Imii. What's the meaning behind the name?
So I wanted it to have a clear connection to immigration. So Imii, immigration. And the reason why it's not double M is originally because there was an app with a double M in the App Store. Then Imii sounds like a human name, like it could be short for Imogen or something like that. And I wanted it to provide that same experience of having a human coordinator. So that gave that human touch to it. And then finally, as I was born and raised in Japan, Japanese used to be my second native language. No longer. I lost the ability to think in it because I barely use it. But in Japanese, Imii is sense or meaning. So it all made sense to me, literally.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. And I love the application of M, because we've done the same with plum. So plum is pronounced or spelled with a double M only because when I was looking at the names, the single M was not available. So no, the true startup spirit, you just add another M and just change the spelling. So getting into the business, okay, so definitely there's a huge market. I'm one of those people as well. I walked in here, I'm like, oh shit, like what the hell? How do I navigate? Like what do I do? And then and it was very difficult for me to find the right people, the right advice and all that. So I completely understand the application and multiple use cases. So let's just get into how does the platform actually work? So, and does it serve everyone, or are you targeting, is your ICP particularly just Russian speaking for the moment?
No, the app only exists in English at the moment. We've got it translated into a couple of languages, but haven't actually integrated that translation. But no, I never wanted to stay in the Russian-speaking community. And I think we're quite privileged because we've got a lot of Telegram chats and communities, which are easier to find than, say, WhatsApp chats or Facebook groups and so on. But where was I? So our current app is universal. Like the B2C version is supposed to be accessible for everybody who needs help. That was always my vision, to retain that impact focus. But having studied the market, we came to the realization that it could be a lifestyle business as a B2C. It can't be a high growth startup, and it's probably not going to reach its impact potential. So I wouldn't say we pivoted, but we shifted our focus more to B2B and B2G. That doesn't mean we abandoned the B2C version, it's just we're not pouring too much resources into it just yet. We might do that later once we have the means to, but at the moment we're still bootstrapped. So right now we're adapting more to B2B, and by B2B I mean organizations and companies bringing in international stuff. But I never wanted to build yet another Relatech software or HR tech software. That was never the case. So I'm deliberately not going after like high tech relocation and stuff. I'm not saying we'll never go there. There are a lot of problems to address there. I know how messed up the relocation process is in Meta, Facebook, or even in Google. It's not optimal. It's very suboptimal. But we don't have to start there, and I wouldn't build a whole product for them because they're fine without us.
Yeah.
There are huge undeserved communities and types of immigrants. So that's where I really want to venture first. And another ambition of mine is obviously B2G. So business to government. It is going to be a long and painful journey, and I know it's going to take a lot of time, but with some of the estimations of our impact, we could save the governments lots of money and generate a lot of money for the economy. And obviously you don't want to calculate impact only in money, but that's the easiest language to understand for stakeholders. The UK government specifically, because that's the market that we assess most, loses millions and millions on poor integration of immigrants, their reliance on social benefit system, marginalizations and marginalization, generational poverty that derives from it. Then there is a huge gap in access to work opportunities for immigrant spouses, because quite a lot of them just follow their partners and they're not integrated at all. And quite often they don't speak the language, and that's also a barrier. Then there is a huge mental health toll, especially that has to do with that loneliness and poor integration. And there is a lot of scientific data to back it. And there is a lot of data on the original model that we digitized to suggest that it can, well, not necessarily solve the problem completely, but do a huge difference about this. So there are a lot of things we can do. Where do we start is the question. So for us, B2B is now the lower hanging fruit. So we're now, fingers crossed, closing our first clients in healthcare recruitment, because healthcare is the main beneficiary of immigration in this country.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Well, I hope we do that. I hope
I'm just putting it out of the universe, because we spoke about the universe multiple times. So I'm putting it out there.
Yeah, but I'm also building those relationships with government sector, starting with councils. So I already had some meetings with councils, and there are a lot of mountains to turn, but I've got another meeting which is very promising in the end of May, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to push for some sort of a joint pilot quite soon. And again, that's going to take months, and we're in no position now to offer any smart integrations with the existing systems, but we'll get there. Just need to start.
So just trying to understand your go-to-market strategy, or actually your segment strategy. So I would just think maybe a B2C angle would be the easiest, although I can appreciate in terms of scalability, but just from a faster revenue generation perspective, because as we all know, revenue is also a lifeline of every single business. I mean, we're in the B2B space, and I mean, the long sales cycles, and obviously that's a challenge. We also tried to move into the NHS, which is technically government sector. And so as soon as you said B2G, I was like, oh wow, there are too many firsts on this podcast. There hasn't been a single person who came to the podcast who said B2G. I'm like, wow, this is crazy. But it's amazing, because obviously there's it's a huge use case. And everything that you said, even from a mental health perspective and loneliness and what the spouses do, is, I mean, it's a big problem. But the problem is very big. So I'm just trying to understand from your strategy perspective. So I mean, wasn't there an angle where, okay, you can maybe apply it, keep the B2C side open as well, or was it, or if it's also about focus, if you do everything, you do nothing. So what was the reason for that shift, focusing only on B2B primarily?
Well, like I said, we're not focusing only on B2B. It's just we know B2C is never going to generate us too much money to justify the investments that we're trying to attract. Again, if we were just building as a lifestyle business, we could live off, well, not necessarily live off, but make some money through affiliate links because we've got all those service providers that were placing on our platform, like credit building solutions, insurance, and all of that. But it is a lot of marketing that needs to be done. There is a lot of value that we have to offer instantly. And I'm not saying it's not a workable strategy. It is. It's just that it's not going to make enough money to satisfy investors. And at the moment, we're still trying to build a high growth startup. And again, I've seen what our competitors, what the market has tried to do. It didn't quite work. So I don't want to step into the same pitfalls that our competitors have already faced and failed, including our biggest predecessor that was that had a similar USP. Not entirely the same, but they were a social network for immigrants, offering that sense of home away from home, connecting people with information events, and also I think they also tried to onboard some service providers. They ran out of cash. They because they raised in the times when it was much easier to attract cash and sell the B2C idea to investors without really proving the monetization strategy. And they raised all the way to Series A. Their last round was 12 mil, and in 2021 they closed with 1 million of users.
Oh, wow.
And they were genuinely missed. Like if you look at their comment section on Instagram, people missed their app.
Oh,
People
wow.
wanted to stay afloat, but they just couldn't. Because I spoke to their team, obviously, when I was researching the market. So I didn't want to repeat the same mistakes. And now I keep an eye on smaller players in the market with like originally similar USP to ours. And again, I see them transitioning to agency businesses because they realize that the platform business does not really keep them afloat. And they're venture backed. Like we were bootstrapped. We have the full flexibility to experiment.
Yeah.
And I'm happy that we didn't fundraise up to this point because we had the flexibility to find out things earlier. We didn't have the cash to splash on our mistakes. So that's why we do keep the B2C stream. We do hope on we are going to introduce paid subscriptions, but we're not going to paywall the app completely.
Got it.
We do realize the conversion into paid users would be lower than the statistical freemium conversion. Like in freemium, I think the conversion is on average like 5 to 10%. So I may be lying, but I think that's what I checked. I wouldn't estimate our conversion over 5% once we launch it. I don't think not too many people will be paying for that. I do see the affiliate links as a viable source of income, but the biggest potential is in B2B and B2G. And like I said, B2B is a lower hanging fruit. Why? Because exactly, NHS is a market that I want to get into. And I can justify in numbers what impact we can make there. For example, nurses alone. NHS loses 9,000 nurses each year. 4 nurses, they churn.
Wow.
Replacing each of them costs approximately £10,000. You can easily calculate how much money it costs to NHS. Now, I'm not saying they all churn because they can't integrate. Obviously, NHS has a lot of problems. I think integration has been evidenced as one of the reasons in surveys. So we have that. And I'm saying, okay, what if we could make life easier and more enticing to stay for just 5 nurses out of 100? 5%. A very realistic number to aim for. You multiply that number and you can save NHS 4.5 million per year just on nurses, just if we aim for a very realistic 5%. But as you already noted, NHS is not for the faint-hearted. We are doing some research. We are speaking to some people, and I say, aside from the fact that it's hard to sell anything to NHS because, again, the budget constraints and stuff, it also takes them to admit that there are some things they're doing wrong. So at first, we need to gather enough evidence that we can offer them a way to save money and make their staff feel better. So agencies are, in that sense, a lower hanging fruit, and that's where we're starting there.
Makes sense. So for for B2B, how's your product placed? Your product is placed as a B2B would offer this as a benefit to the employees. Is that your positioning?
It's not just benefit for employers. It's also reducing the workload on the agency staff. Because right now,
Okay.
it's their HRs or mobility managers or whatever they're calling themselves. They are the ones in charge of solving every single query, responding to those questions and distributing the content and all of that. The thing is, a lot of these problems are and questions are standard. You don't need a human to solve or to respond to every which of them. So I'm not suggesting that we completely replace a human with AI. We can't do that. But we can only involve the humans when they're actually needed to automate what can be automated, but still keep that, certain personalized angle with the help of AI. So AI in here is not the core, it's rather that's what makes the experience a bit more human-like and overall nicer, more adapted to a specific person.
So your buyer obviously is the HR, and within the HR, this comes off from their, your return on investment you're showing is your recruitment cost. So
It's reducing the churn, it's reducing the workloads, which again can be calculated of how many hours is spent
Right.
on answering these questions. So obviously it's not a problem just for healthcare, just again in healthcare, the cuts on immigrant workforce don't affect healthcare that much because they just can't completely say no to immigrant workforce.
yeah.
Not in this country, at least. Not
Yeah.
for the time being. So that's why we're there. And I'm hoping that from there we can venture into other industries as well. But again, I'm not saying we'll never go into higher check enterprises. I just don't want to make products specifically for them because this would contradict to my mission.
Got it. So then in terms of mission, what is the 3-year plan? Where does Imii sit in your mind's eye in the next 3 years? What is Imii achieving?
Well, when you're early stage, it's always hard, right? But fortunately, again, I've studied the market back and forth. So I'd say from the mission perspective, Home is the app that ran out of cash and closed down, is a good example of taking over the market and being loved by immigrants and becoming a name in the immigrant world. So they hit 1 million users by the end of year 3, 4. Yeah, I think in year 4 of their existence, they had 1 million users.
Oh, that's fast.
That is fast.
Wow.
Now I'm saying, well, that's why they closed down, because they burned through their cash. So let's be a little bit less ambitious and say 500,000 by the end of year 3. And by the end of year 3, I mean since the day we raise. So not from today, but once we raise, that's my projection that so in 3 years' time, we're going to spend this much money, we're going to hit this many millions of ARR through B2B, B2G, and B2C, and this is the number of people we will be serving. So that's my ambition. A few public sector contracts by that time would be great. I think in 3 years, it's not completely unrealistic to expect, like I said, a few contracts. It would be good to become a household name and be used at least nationwide, but that would probably be a bit too ambitious. But again, let's see.
And do you think now you've found your sense of purpose?
Well, sense of purpose is not about one specific project, is it? It's overall making sure that every day you're doing something that you wouldn't be ashamed to look back on. So will Imii succeed? I hope, but I don't know. But when in a few years' time I'd be telling people what I was doing, I wouldn't be ashamed to say, well, I was trying to build a platform that helped immigrants feel better and thrive in their new homes. So for me, it's very important to be proud of what I'm doing, to be excited about what I'm telling people. So I definitely wouldn't be excited telling people how many millions I earned or how much millions I generated for some B2B SaaS company. That's not really something that would drive me, and that's not something I would want to be written on my Wikipedia page whenever I get it. So yeah, it's just about genuinely adhering to my mission and always making sure that my compass is aligned with it.
I love that. I love that. I don't know. Maybe I'm biased because I can feel everything that you've said simply because I'm that person. Like technically, I'm your ICP. You're speaking to that person. I'm your customer, but I just love the whole mission, which is, and I think that's super important as well. Something that is bigger than you. I think that is really important. I love what you're doing. I wish you all the best, and hopefully you guys raise soon. And the sooner you raise, the sooner you can realize that 3 years plan. Just one last question before we end. You've obviously come a long way from that young person in Japan, and you've done a lot of going back and forth and too many things you've achieved so far. What would you like to tell that person today?
I think the one thing I would tell that person is, if no one's done it before, it doesn't mean you can't.
Yep. I love that. I love that. Well, I wish you all the best. I hope this inspires a lot of people as well, people across the globe, because a lot of people are trying to do a lot. And there's you spoke about, the political tension. There's just too much happening in this world at this point in time, in many parts of the world. And a lot of people are trying to do whatever it takes to change their lives. A lot of people are trying to move countries and immigrate. And so hopefully that inspires a lot of people. And I wish you all the best. And hopefully in 3 years' time, or maybe even before, we can catch up again and we can see where you're at and where Imii is at. I wish you all the best. And thank you so much for coming on the pod.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine.